They say when you've given your life to others, you deserve a peaceful ending. That was all I wanted. My name is Dorothy Johnson. I'm 69 years old, and I spent 4 decades shaping young minds as an elementary school teacher in Baton Rouge. After retiring, I moved to a quiet little town in Louisiana, a place where cicadas sang you to sleep and the neighbors still waved from their porches. I bought a modest house with a white fence and a creaky front gate. Nothing fancy, just peace, finally. I planted roses in the spring, drank coffee on the porch, and listened to the wind dance through the trees. My days were slow, predictable, and for the first time in years, my own. I volunteered at the library on Wednesdays, taught quilting at the community center, and sometimes joined the church ladies for potlucks, even though I was never big on casseroles. People around here called me Miss Dorothy. They said I was kind, gentle, harmless. Funny how that word, harmless, sticks with you. Because deep down, I knew something most people didn't. The quietest lives can still be torn apart. And the most harmless woman you know, she might just survive something you can't even imagine. I didn't know it yet, but my story was about to begin, and it wouldn't be the peaceful ending I thought I'd earned. It had been 17 years since I'd last heard his voice, not since the night he stole my wedding ring to buy pills, not since he disappeared into the haze of his addiction, leaving behind nothing but broken promises and police reports. And yet there he was, on my porch, a silhouette against the late summer sky. "Hi, Mama," he said, like time hadn't cracked us wide open. "Marcus, my only child, my son." He looked thinner, older. There were lines around his mouth that hadn't been there before, but his eyes, the same green eyes I rocked to sleep as a baby, held something I hadn't seen in years: stillness. He told me he'd gotten clean, been sober for almost 3 years, living in Shreveport, working odd jobs, trying to rebuild. He said he was sorry for all of it, and he wanted to come home, just for a little while. He said, "I can help you around the house. I'll sleep on the couch if I have to. I miss my mama." I wanted to slam the door. I wanted to scream all the pain I'd buried since he left. But instead I said, "You hungry?" Because the truth is, loneliness makes fools of us all. I didn't trust him, not fully. But the house had been too quiet lately, and my bones weren't as strong as they used to be. So I let him in. I set out a plate, fried chicken, biscuits, sweet tea. He smiled as he ate, like he hadn't tasted home in years. Maybe he hadn't, and I told myself, maybe people do change, maybe. But deep down, I kept the locks on my bedroom door, just in case. At first, everything felt almost normal. Marcus mowed the lawn, fixed the squeaky back door, and even re-caulked the bathroom sink. He brought me coffee in the mornings, said yes ma'am, like he was still 10 years old and in trouble. But then came the quiet moments, the ones in between. I started noticing things, little things, things you wouldn't catch if you didn't live alone for as long as I had. Like how my mail started arriving opened, or not at all. Or how the photo of me and my late husband disappeared from the fireplace mantel. I found it later stuffed in a drawer, like someone didn't want it looking back at them. Marcus would make odd comments too, like, "This house is a lot for one person," or "You ever think about downsizing?" He said it lightly, like he was joking. But I wasn't laughing. And then there were his friends. They came late, too late. Old cars with tinted windows parked just down the road. Men who never looked me in the eye when they passed through the living room. The kind of people who didn't belong in a town like ours, much less in my home. He said they were just coworkers, but they didn't talk like coworkers. They mumbled, they lingered. One of them smelled like gasoline and metal. Another one left a cigarette burn in my porch's swing cushion. I told Marcus I didn't like them coming over. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's when I started double-checking the back door. That's when I moved the spare key from the porch planter to under my mattress. That's when I stopped sleeping all the way through the night. Something wasn't right, and I could feel it in my bones. The same bones that once knew when storms were coming. Only this storm wasn't made of wind or rain. It was made of something darker, and it was already inside my house. It started with a metallic taste, subtle, barely there, like sucking on an old penny. I noticed it one night over dinner. Marcus had made stew, beef, carrots, potatoes. He said he followed my old recipe, the one I used to make on cold school nights. But the taste lingered, bitter, almost burned. I figured he must have used the wrong seasoning. He never was much of a cook. The next morning, I had trouble getting out of bed. My legs felt like wet sandbags. My hands trembled as I reached for the lamp. I thought it was the weather, or arthritis, or just age. But then it happened again and again. Each time after dinner, a deep fatigue would creep in. My joints ached, my stomach churned, and the back of my throat felt dry, like I'd swallowed cotton. I started skipping breakfast. My appetite was fading. The smallest noise would make my heart race. My memory, usually sharp, began to blur at the edges. I lost track of the days. Still, I didn't say anything. You learn, as a woman, especially an old one, not to complain too quickly. People call it hysteria or paranoia when it's coming from a gray-haired mouth. I told myself maybe it was just menopause's final punch, maybe a cold coming on, maybe depression. After all, Marcus being back stirred up a lot. But the bitter taste kept returning, sometimes in soup, sometimes in tea, once in cornbread. And then there was the night I didn't eat, just wasn't hungry. I wrapped up my plate and went to bed early. And for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. No tremors, no nausea, no dry mouth. That's when the thought whispered, quiet but sharp, "It's not you, it's the food." I stared at the ceiling for hours after that, listening, thinking, trying to ignore the new flavor of fear rising in my throat. Because what kind of son feeds his mother poison? And worse, what kind of mother lets him? If there's one thing you can count on in a small Louisiana town, it's that someone's always watching from a window. Claudine Whitaker was my neighbor for nearly 20 years, widowed, church-going, the kind of woman who baked lemon bars when someone sneezed. She'd never been one for gossip, but she knew things, and she knew me. She caught me one morning at the mailbox. I hadn't even brushed my hair yet. The heat was thick, and the sun felt like too much too early. "You all right, Dorothy?" she asked, squinting. "You don't look like yourself." I smiled, the kind of smile you give when you don't want to talk about it. "Just tired, that's all." Claudine didn't blink. She glanced at my porch, where Marcus sat drinking coffee and staring into the street like he was waiting on something or someone. She lowered her voice and leaned in. "Can I tell you something? It's probably none of my business, but your boy's been saying strange things around town." My stomach clenched. "Like what?" She looked over her shoulder before continuing. "He was at Ronnie's auto last week. Said he was thinking about moving into your house full-time. Mentioned he might inherit it. Said," she paused, "said you were getting old and wouldn't need it much longer." I stood still, my breath shallow. Claudine touched my arm, her voice softer now. "I'm not trying to scare you. But he also asked Pastor Jim if he knew any lawyers who deal with wills. That word hit me like a slap. Wills. I hadn't even thought about my will in years. It was tucked away in a fireproof box beneath my bed. Marcus wasn't even listed as sole beneficiary anymore. Not after what he did back then. I didn't say much, just nodded. Claudine gave my hand a squeeze. You just be careful, Dorothy. Something feels off with him. I can feel it in my teeth, and my teeth don't lie. That night, I sat on my bed for hours. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just stared at that fireproof box, and I began to wonder, was my son waiting for me to die? Or worse, was he trying to hurry the process along? I waited until after dinner. He'd made spaghetti. Too much garlic, not enough sauce. I pushed my plate around, pretending to eat. My stomach twisted, not from hunger, but from the question I'd been holding on my tongue for days. When he took his dish to the sink, I spoke. Marcus, I said quietly, have you touched my pills? He turned slowly. What? My prescriptions, I clarified, trying to keep my voice calm. My heart meds, the painkillers for my knee. They don't look right anymore. The colors are off. Some are missing. He stared at me, blinking. No shock. No confusion. Just a slow, thin smile. Then he laughed. Not a full laugh. Just a breath through his nose. You think I'm messing with your pills now, he said, his voice low. Come on, Mama. But something had changed in his tone. Gone was the gentle, boyish apology from the night he knocked on my door. What replaced it was colder, sharper, like steel under velvet. I stood up. I'm serious. Don't lie to me. He didn't answer at first, just turned off the sink, dried his hands slowly, methodically. Then he leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Why would I touch your meds? He said. I've been helping you, cooking, cleaning. You think I came back to hurt you? You think I don't remember what you've done? I asked. He flinched, just barely, and then he smiled again, tighter this time. That was a long time ago, Mama. People change. Do they? The silence between us was heavy. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of cicadas outside. The kitchen felt smaller, darker. Finally, he said, maybe you're just confused. You've been looking tired lately. Maybe your memory's not what it used to be. There it was, the gaslight, the twist of the knife, not in flesh, but in the mind. I stood there, heart pounding, and I realized this wasn't my little boy. This was a man who'd learned how to wear kindness like a mask. And the mask was slipping. Claudine showed up the next morning without calling. She had a Tupperware of banana pudding in one hand and a tight expression on her face. Behind her stood her husband, Howard, retired pest control, veteran, and the most careful man I'd ever met. Don't be mad, she said, stepping inside. But I told him what you told me, about your symptoms, about the food. Howard tipped his cap to me. Ma'am, he said, you mind if I take a quick look at your kitchen? I blinked, caught off guard. Sure. He didn't waste time. Straight to the cabinets, then the trash. He sniffed around like a bloodhound, checking under the sink, tapping behind the spice rack. When he pulled out the drawer with my tea bags and teaspoons, he paused. This one, he said. He held up a small stainless steel spoon, my favorite one, with the little floral engraving on the handle. There was a dusting of white powder along the inside curve of the bowl. He scraped it with his gloved finger, sniffed it, then looked at Claudine. His jaw tightened. You were right, he muttered. Zinc phosphide, rat poison. My stomach dropped. Claudine gasped and gripped the counter. I just stared at the spoon, frozen. But how could that get there? I whispered. Howard set it gently on a paper towel, like it was something sacred or cursed. It's not the kind of stuff that just shows up, he said. It's a bait poison, fine powder, tasteless in small amounts, bitter in others. Mixed into food or drink, it causes fatigue, confusion, organ failure, exactly what you've been describing. I backed into the wall. The teacup I'd used the night before still sat in the sink. Marcus had poured it for me. I didn't even finish it, I mumbled. Thank God for that, Claudine said. Dorothy, this is serious. You need to get that boy out of your house. Howard looked me dead in the eye. This isn't carelessness. This is intent. Whoever's doing this, they want you gone. Slowly, quietly. The room spun. My ears rang. The bitter taste, the dizziness, the sleep that felt more like slipping away than resting. And Marcus, always offering to make tea, always clearing the dishes. I thought of his voice the night before, calm, cold, calculated. And suddenly, I knew. He wasn't back to help. He was back to finish something he started years ago. I didn't scream. I didn't call the police. And I didn't confront Marcus. Not yet. Because when you live alone long enough, you learn something valuable. Panic gets you killed. Preparation keeps you alive. That night, I sat in bed with a small spiral notebook I used for grocery lists and phone numbers. I opened to a fresh page and wrote, in small shaky letters, Monday, tea, slightly bitter, no food, slept through night, no nausea. Tuesday, spaghetti, Marcus cooked, metallic aftertaste, dizzy within 2 hours. Wednesday, toast and eggs, I cooked, no symptoms. I created 2 columns, what I ate and what I felt. And slowly, I began building a case. I wrote down everything, even things that seemed silly. How many hours I slept, what Marcus said at dinner, which mugs he used, whether the salt shaker had been moved. Each detail was a piece of the puzzle. And puzzles, well, I used to be real good at those. 3rd grade logic games were my specialty. Turns out, they weren't so different from survival. By the end of the week, I had 4 pages of notes. The pattern was clear. When I cooked, I felt fine. When he cooked, I lost pieces of myself. Sometimes I pretended to eat. Sometimes I scraped my plate into the trash when he wasn't looking. Once, I switched our mugs, just to test. That night, he went to bed early with a headache. He thought he was clever, but he'd forgotten something. I was still his mother, and I'd spent my whole life reading children, especially the ones who thought they were smarter than me. I also started leaving notes in strange places, just in case. Inside old recipe books, behind photo frames, tucked under the drawer liners. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. My handwriting, my words, my last defense. He watched me like I was still weak, but the truth was, I was watching him too. I made the appointment under a different name. Didn't want Marcus to know I was going anywhere that day. I told him I was heading to the farmer's market with Claudine. He didn't even look up from his phone when I said it. Dr. Patel's office was 45 minutes away, far enough to feel safe, close enough in case I started to feel faint again. Claudine insisted on driving me, said she had a bad feeling. I'd learned to trust those. Dr. Patel was young, sharp, and didn't talk down to me, which, at my age, was a rare kindness. She listened carefully as I explained my symptoms: fatigue, confusion, tremors, nausea. I didn't mention the rat poison. Not yet. I just feel off, I told her, like something's wrong inside me, and I can't put my finger on it. She nodded, asked questions, ordered a full panel of blood work. 3 days later, I got the call. Miss Johnson, she said, voice steady. We need to talk. I went back that afternoon. Her face was a shade paler than I remembered. She didn't beat around the bush. We found abnormally high levels of anticoagulants in your blood, specifically compounds that aren't typically prescribed. One of them is, well, it's commonly found in rodenticides. I stared at her. Rat poison. She hesitated, then nodded. Yes, warfarin-like compounds, but in much higher quantities than would be expected for medication use. You said you aren't on blood thinners. I shook my head slowly. These levels, they're dangerous. Long-term exposure can cause internal bleeding, organ damage. It's not something that happens by accident. I felt cold, not scared, cold. Like something inside me had gone numb from confirmation. She leaned forward. Miss Johnson, I have to ask, is someone preparing your meals for you? I looked at my hands, the age spots, the tremble in my thumb. My son, I said. There was a silence, not awkward, heavy. I can refer you to authorities, she said gently. Or social services. No, I replied too quickly. Not yet, I need time. Time for what? I met her eyes. Mine were steady. Time to show him he chose the wrong woman. She didn't argue. She just handed me a folder with my results and a card with her personal number. If anything changes, call me. That night, I hid the folder beneath a floorboard under my bed. And for the first time since Marcus came back, I didn't sleep like prey. I slept like a woman preparing for war. His name was Jordan Myers. I taught him in 4th grade. Bright kid, always asked questions no one else thought to ask. I still remembered his handwriting. Tidy, upright, a little too perfect for a 10-year-old boy. Now he wore a tailored suit and had his name etched on the glass door of a small law firm just outside Baton Rouge. When I walked into his office, he stood so fast his chair nearly fell over. Miss Johnson, he said, smiling like he was 10 again. You look exactly the same. I didn't, but the kindness in his eyes was a comfort I didn't know I needed. We talked over coffee. I didn't give every detail, just enough. I told him I believed my son was poisoning me, that I had reason to believe he was doing it slowly and deliberately. Jordan didn't laugh. He didn't blink. He listened. When I showed him my notebook and slid the lab results across his desk, his jaw tightened. You've got something here, he said. But not enough, not yet. I stared at him. You believe me? He met my gaze. Miss Johnson, I sat in your classroom every day for a year. You taught me how to think, how to see through people. You were never wrong about anything. If you say something's off, then it is. I felt tears pushing behind my eyes, but I held them in. What should I do? He leaned forward, voice low and firm. You keep collecting photos, dates, leftover food samples if you can get them. Keep logging everything. You don't act rash, you don't scream. You wait. Wait for what? He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was surgical. You wait until you've built a case strong enough to crush him with one strike. No warning, no escape. I nodded, my fingers clenched around my cup. He reached across the table, rested a hand on mine. He doesn't know who he's dealing with, Jordan said. You taught me to fight smart. Now you do the same. That night, I went home and sharpened the edges of my silence. Marcus asked how the farmer's market was. I smiled and held up a jar of honey. Inside my chest, the fire was burning brighter. I wouldn't scream. I'd document. I'd wait. And then, when it mattered most, I'd end this. I knew something had shifted the moment he stopped calling me Mama. It was subtle, just Dorothy now, sometimes Ma, cold, detached, like he was practicing letting go of me before anyone else did. One morning, over burnt toast, he cleared his throat. "You ever think about moving into a care facility?" he asked, way too casual. I blinked. "A what?" "You know, like assisted living. Just somewhere safer. Less for you to worry about. No stairs. Nurses around in case you forget your meds again." I stirred my tea slowly. "You think I forget my meds?" He smiled. "I'm just saying, this place is a lot. It's an old house, and you're getting older too." I said nothing. That same evening, he brought up the will. "I was looking in the hallway closet," he said. "Found some of Dad's old paperwork. Got me thinking. Do you even have a current will?" I feigned confusion. "I don't remember." "Why?" "You should probably get one done, just in case. You know, before anything happens." That phrase stuck to the back of my throat like glass. Before anything happens. He didn't stop there. 2 days later, he handed me a manila folder filled with typed papers. Medical power of attorney, durable power of attorney, suggested revisions for my will. Pages already highlighted and marked with sticky notes. I asked around. He said, "One of my friends helped draft these. I figured we could go to a notary next week, sign everything, just to make things official." Official. He meant irreversible. He meant legalized control. I looked at the documents, his handwriting, his fingerprints, his hubris. So I smiled. Software sweet. "You're right," I said. "You've done so much for me. It's time I trusted you back." He exhaled with visible relief, like I'd finally broken. But I hadn't. I was acting. Because now I knew the game he was playing. And I was going to beat him at it. That night, I scanned every page he gave me and sent them to Jordan. Then I placed the originals back into the folder, right where he left them. I didn't alter a word. I wanted his intentions to remain visible, on paper, for a judge to see later. The next day, I told Marcus I'd made an appointment with a local notary. I even let him drive me. All smiles, all trust. But what he didn't know was this. I'd already changed my will. I'd already updated my power of attorney, with Jordan's help. And I'd already told the notary to make a secret copy of whatever Marcus brought in. He thought I was frail, gullible, done. But I was simply buying time, buying space, and letting the predator walk straight into the trap I built. It was Thursday. Marcus had offered to cook again, chicken and rice soup, just like you used to make, Mama, he said, flashing that hollow smile. I played along, even complimented the smell coming from the kitchen. But something in his posture made the hairs on my arms stand up. He hovered near the stove, like he was guarding it. Every time I stepped close, he shifted his body between me and the pot. He was hiding something. I told him I needed to use the restroom and stepped out of the kitchen. What I really did was wait, just outside the doorway, silent as breath. When I peeked in, I saw it. Marcus, his back to me, stirring the soup slowly. Then, with the quietest flick of his wrist, he shook something into the pot from his coat pocket. It was fast, practiced. He thought he was clever. I walked in loud enough to give him warning. "Smells great," I said, smiling as if I hadn't seen a thing. He smiled back, but I caught the tension in his shoulders. We sat at the table a few minutes later, 2 bowls of steaming soup between us. I excused myself once more, said I forgot my napkin, and when I returned, I switched the bowls. Just like that, he didn't notice. Too confident, too sure of himself. I watched him take 3 full spoonfuls before I even picked mine up. By the 5th bite, a subtle change came over him. He blinked twice, touched his lips, then his stomach. "You okay?" I asked sweetly. He nodded, but his forehead was damp. 5 more minutes, and he was sweating, pale. He pushed his bowl away. Think I'm gonna lie down. I offered to help him, but he shook me off. An hour later, I heard him vomiting in the downstairs bathroom, gagging, gasping. I didn't get up. I sat on the porch, the cool night air brushing against my skin, my notebook open in my lap. Thursday, soup night. Marcus cooked. I switched bowls. He fell ill within 30 minutes, vomited thrice. I underlined that last line 3 times. He didn't say a word about it the next day, neither did I, but we both knew he had crossed a line, and I had drawn one of my own. He looked at me differently after that. There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not guilt, fear, good. Let him feel what it's like to be hunted. Because this time, he wasn't the only one playing with poison. The next phase had to be quiet, precise, unforgiving. Claudine showed up on a Sunday afternoon with a cloth tote bag and eyes sharper than I'd ever seen on her. "My nephew sells tech on the side," she whispered as we sat at the dining table. "Said these are motion-triggered, high-res, Wi-Fi ready." She pulled out 3 tiny cameras, no bigger than a button. One disguised as a smoke detector, another inside a digital clock, and the last hidden in what looked like a pill organizer. I stared at the pill organizer, then at her. "You're scary when you want to be," I said. She gave me a wink. "I learned from the best. We waited until Marcus went into town. Said he needed to pick up supplies." Which probably meant whatever he was lacing his pockets with. That gave us a window. Claudine worked fast. We placed the fake clock camera on the kitchen shelf, angled toward the stove. The smoke detector went in the hallway, pointed toward the living room and entryway. And the pillbox camera, well, that one nestled itself right into the drawer where I kept my medications. "I linked them to this app," Claudine said, showing me her phone. "I'll get the notifications. I'll log everything. You don't need to lift a finger." I nodded. I couldn't believe how far this had come. A few months ago, I was baking banana bread and worrying about my cholesterol. Now I was running surveillance ops with a 72-year-old woman who still wore her hair in rollers. When Marcus came home, I was already sitting on the porch with a book in hand. He didn't notice anything different. He never looked up, and that was his mistake, because I saw everything now. Every glance at my teacup, every time he reached for my pill drawer with those careful fingers, every fake smile, every pause at the hallway mirror. He thought he was clever, but the cameras didn't lie. And for the first time, I wasn't just guessing. I was watching, recording, building. And when the moment came to strike, I'd have everything I needed. It happened on a Tuesday. Claudine called me just after 9 p.m. No small talk, no pleasantries. "Dorothy," she said, voice tight, "you need to see this, right now." I walked across the yard in my slippers and housecoat. The night was quiet, muggy, thick with the hum of summer bugs. But inside her kitchen, the air was still. She had the laptop open on the table. I leaned over her shoulder as she rewound the footage from the kitchen camera. The date stamp read 6:43 p.m. There was Marcus standing in front of the stove. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small plastic bag, clear, with a white powder inside. He didn't even hesitate. He shook it gently into the mug on the counter. My mug, the one with the faded #1 teacher print I used every night. Then he stirred with my spoon. Claudine froze the frame there, but I touched her hand. "Keep going." She pressed play. And then he said it, clear as day, to himself, like a man narrating his own sins. "Sooner or later, this'll all be over." He didn't laugh. He didn't smirk. He just stared at the cup like it was a job half finished. I stepped back. My knees almost gave. But I didn't cry. Not this time. Because this was it. This wasn't suspicion. This wasn't a pattern in my notebook or a whisper of bitterness in my throat. This was proof, intent, premeditation, attempted murder. I sat down slowly. Claudine turned to me, eyes wide. "This is more than enough, Dorothy. You take this to the police. He's done." I nodded. But my mind wasn't racing ahead. It was still stuck in the quiet, steady way he stirred that tea. Like he'd done it 100 times before. Like he'd never expected me to notice. But I did. And now I had the truth. In pixels. In sound. In cold, undeniable evidence. He said it would all be over soon. He was right. Just not in the way he thought. I invited him to cook. That alone should have tipped him off. I hadn't asked Marcus to make dinner in weeks, but he was so confident, so sure he had me where he wanted, that he didn't even question it. "I thought we could do a proper Sunday meal," I told him sweetly. "Something nice, just a few friends I haven't seen in a while." He barely looked up. "Sure, I'll handle it." He cooked all afternoon. Roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans, peach cobbler cooling on the counter. The kitchen smelled like a Norman Rockwell painting. What he didn't know was, every element of that evening had been staged. Jordan, my former student, and now my attorney, arrived first. Wore jeans, no tie, just looked like any other neighbor stopping by for supper. Dr. Patel came next. She brought a bottle of wine and her husband, smiled politely, and gave Marcus a handshake. And then came Officer Lyle Duncan, old family friend, retired last year, still carried weight in this town. He showed up in khakis and a fishing hat, laughing about Dorothy's legendary pot roast and patting Marcus on the back like nothing was wrong. Marcus thought it was just a regular dinner party. He didn't know he was surrounded, and I wore pearls, a soft blue sweater, lipstick I hadn't touched in months. I was the perfect image of the aging mother, weak, grateful, blind. Dinner was served just after 6:30. Marcus dished every plate himself. He even poured the tea. He handed me my mug last. I didn't drink it. None of us did. Instead, Jordan cleared his throat and said, "Before we eat, Dorothy, you mind if I say a quick word?" I nodded. My hands were steady in my lap. He stood up, reached into his bag, pulled out a laptop, turned it toward the center of the table. With one click, the kitchen footage began to play. Marcus froze. The video was silent at first, then his voice filled the room. "Sooner or later, this'll all be over." His hands began to tremble. The fork fell from his plate and hit the hardwood with a metallic clang. Officer Duncan didn't blink, just reached into his pocket and slowly pulled out a small digital recorder. "Marcus Johnson," he said, calm as a lake, "you are under investigation for attempted murder. Anything you say from this moment on—" No, this is crazy." Marcus stood up, backing away from the table. "That video doesn't prove, will be used against you in a court of law," Duncan finished. Marcus turned to me, and in his face, finally, panic. Real, unfiltered, raw. "You set me up," he whispered. I stood too, looked him straight in the eyes. "No," I said softly. "You walked right into the fire you lit yourself." The dishes hadn't even been cleared when Officer Duncan made the call. A uniformed deputy arrived within minutes. Claudine had been parked 2 streets away with a sample container ready, just like we'd planned. Marcus's fingerprints were all over every dish. Dr. Patel, silent until then, stepped forward and collected my untouched tea mug, sealing it carefully. She handed it over to Duncan. along with a second sample. A portion of the chicken Marcus had served me, scraped discreetly from my plate. The deputy took it all without a word. Procedure, evidence. Jordan reviewed the footage one last time, marking the exact timestamp. The camera had caught it all. The powder, the muttered confession, the delivery. There would be no plea deals, no ambiguity, only facts. Marcus didn't fight as the cuffs were placed on his wrists, didn't shout, didn't protest, but he did speak just once. He looked at me, not with hate, not even with regret, just a hollow sort of exhaustion. And he said, "She was gonna die soon anyway." The room went quiet. Even Duncan looked stunned. Jordan stared at him, jaw locked. Dr. Patel's hands trembled. But me? I just exhaled, because there it was. Finally, the full truth laid bare. Not just the poison, not just the footage, intent. He didn't do it out of desperation. He did it out of entitlement, like I was a piece of property he could liquidate, like my life had an expiration date he got to decide. As they walked him out, I stood at the doorway, watched the blue and red lights flicker across the hydrangeas in my front yard, watched him duck into the squad car, shoulders hunched, eyes forward, and I whispered, more to myself than anyone else, "Not today. And not by your hand." He was gone in seconds, but the weight of what he'd tried to do would linger far longer. The trial began 6 weeks later. By then, the entire town knew. In a place like ours, news doesn't travel. It seeps into grocery aisles, church pews, barber shops. Everywhere I went, whispers followed. "Did you hear about Marcus Johnson? Tried to poison his own mama." I always knew something was off about that boy. Claudine walked beside me every morning we entered the courthouse. Jordan held my elbow as we climbed the steps. Dr. Patel sat behind me the day she testified, her voice steady as she described the chemical compounds found in my blood. And I wore the same blue sweater from the night of the dinner, not for drama, but because I wanted him to see. I remembered every detail. Marcus sat across the room, hands clasped, no longer in control of anything. Not the story, not the outcome, not even his own belt. He didn't look at me during testimony, not once. The footage was played on the courtroom screens. People gasped softly when his voice filled the room. Sooner or later, this'll all be over. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the witness stand alone. Jordan had offered to read a statement on my behalf, but this part, I needed to say myself. The room quieted as I took my seat and faced the jury. "My name is Dorothy Johnson," I began. "I taught school in this town for 41 years. I raised one son. I gave him everything I had. And when he came back into my life, I believed, maybe foolishly, that people can change." I paused. Let the silence do what it needed to. He tried to take my life, not in a moment of rage, not in desperation, but slowly, carefully, with planning, with patience, with a smile on his face. I looked at Marcus then. His eyes stayed low. I lived alone for a long time. I know what it's like to be invisible, to be underestimated. But I promise you this, if I had to do it all over again, I would choose to survive. Every single time. That was all. No theatrics, no tears, just the truth. The verdict came 2 days later. Guilty. Attempted murder in the first degree. Sentencing would follow, but for now, the gavel dropped and the weight lifted. I stepped outside the courthouse as the bells from the Methodist church down the road chimed noon. The sun was warm on my face, and I thought, I didn't just survive him, I buried the lie he tried to build around me. The judge didn't flinch. 100 years, that was the sentence. No parole, no early release, no appeals that would ever matter. The courtroom didn't erupt. There were no gasps or cries, just a quiet kind of finality, like a door shutting in a long hallway. Marcus didn't react. He just stood there, wrists cuffed, chin lowered. I half wondered if he even heard it, or maybe he had stopped listening a long time ago, long before he stirred poison into his mother's tea. People asked later if I cried. They wanted to know if I felt relief, closure, rage. I told them the truth. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just sat there and breathed. Because what no one tells you about justice is how heavy it still feels when it arrives. Yes, I was alive, but it came at a price. I walked out of that courthouse with a back a little straighter and a heart a little emptier. I went home to a clean house, a quiet one, no creaking footsteps down the hall, no coughing from the guest room, no mugs moved from the cabinet, no small signs of someone living under your roof, hiding poison behind affection, just silence. I stood in the kitchen that night and looked at the tea mug, the one with #1 teacher, still faded across the front. I didn't throw it away. I placed it high on the shelf, like a trophy, a reminder of what I survived, of who I outlived, of what a mother becomes when love is not returned. Later, a journalist from New Orleans asked to interview me for a podcast. "You're a strong woman," she said, "a symbol of resilience." I laughed, bitter and soft. "No," I told her, "I'm just someone who didn't die." She pressed me for a quote, something powerful. So I gave her one. I gave him life, and he tried to take mine, but I remembered how to fight harder than he remembered how to love. The recording went viral, but I didn't care for any of that. What mattered was this: he was gone, and I was still here. Lonely, yes, but free. And sometimes, that's the closest thing to justice you ever get. The letter came on thick ivory paper, tucked inside a gold-trimmed envelope. It looked like an invitation to a wedding, or maybe a funeral. I almost tossed it with the junk mail until I noticed the return address: Harbor and Finch Publishing, New York City. Inside, the letter was short, professional, and wildly surreal. "Dear Mrs. Johnson, we followed your trial. We read the court transcripts, the testimony, and the article published by the New Orleans Sentinel. Your story, it matters, it echoes. We would be honored to help you tell it." At the bottom was a handwritten note in blue ink. "I lost my mother to elder abuse. Thank you for surviving what others couldn't. Elaine Finch, Senior Editor." I read it 3 times. Then I sat in the same kitchen chair where Marcus once handed me poisoned tea and laughed. Not a joyful laugh, a disbelieving one, that someone, anyone, thought my pain could become pages, that what I lived through might mean something to strangers in cities I'd never visit. 2 weeks later, I was on a video call with a literary agent named Marla. She wore thick-rimmed glasses and used words like memoir, true crime angle, and healing narrative. But I told her plainly, I don't want it to be sensational. I want it to be honest. She smiled. Honesty sells more than blood these days. We worked through the outline together. 20 chapters. From the knock on my door to the cuffs on his wrists. I wrote every night. At the kitchen table, in the quiet. No music, no distractions, just memory. The title came to me one morning as I stared at my old tea mug. Poison in the Tea, a survival story. Marla loved it. The publisher added a subtitle, How One Woman Took Back Her Life, One Cup at a Time. Cheesy, maybe, but it was true. Every time I turned down that cup, every time I chose not to die, was another chapter. When I signed the contract, I didn't feel proud. I felt settled. Like maybe now, someone out there, some daughter, some mother, some forgotten soul in a quiet house, might read my words and realize they aren't alone. That survival doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a woman, sitting at her kitchen table, writing. The roses bloomed late that year. Too much spring rain, the gardener said. But I didn't mind. They were fuller somehow, wiser, like they'd learned that patience was its own kind of strength. I sat beneath the old oak tree in the yard, the one that leaned slightly like it knew life rarely grows straight. Steam rose from my cup. This time, the tea was just tea. No bitterness, no aftertaste, no questions. Claudine still came by every Sunday afternoon. She brought lemon squares and stories from the hair salon. She never brought up Marcus. No one did. Not anymore. His name was folded and filed away, like an old document you don't need, but keep just in case. Sometimes I'd see kids riding bikes past the house. One of them, Grace, from up the street, called me Miss D and asked if I still had the cookies with the peanut butter in the middle. I told her I'd make a fresh batch next week. They called me strong in the newspapers, resilient, but those words never quite fit right. Truth is, I was just tired of losing. So I chose to win, quietly, without revenge, without rage, without needing to be understood. Some days, I still feel the echo of it all. The tea, the trembling, the silence between breaths. But most days, I feel light. I walk barefoot through the grass. I talk to the birds like they're old friends. I let the sun touch my skin without apology. And I've learned something. Peace doesn't come from justice. Peace comes when the storm is behind you, and you're still standing. I took another sip. Let the wind ruffle the edges of my robe. From the kitchen, the timer dinged. Peach cobbler. For no one in particular, just me. And that was enough.